Peace, everyone. My name is Winston Griffith, and today we're going to try to answer the question, is there any environmental justice for Central Brooklyn? So let's go to the graphs that we have here just to set up the conversation. So we know in Brooklyn in general that Con Edison has already projected that in a certain area, it's not going to be able to meet the demands of the people who live there. So that means that during this period, over the next 10 years, when there's a power surge or when there's a heat wave, we are vulnerable. And as we know, the people who live in low and moderate income neighborhoods, people of color, are the most vulnerable. In fact, when Con Edison talks about what neighborhoods are going to be most deeply affected by this high demand, it's neighborhoods where 90% of the people there are people of color, and 76% of the people there have a median income of less than 30%. So there's a real lack of energy, you could say, or there's going to be a struggle with demand coming over the next 10 years. So we're going to be talking about that today. And when you think of the moments in New York City history when local activists have fought to save their neighborhoods from environmental dangers, issues like waste transfer stations, brownfields, and waterfront protection immediately come to mind. As a result, it's easy to believe that Central Brooklyn, which is a landlocked area that has, for the most part, sidestepped many of these landmines, is environmentally safe and sound. But recently, concerns like Con Edison's struggle to meet Central Brooklyn's energy demands, or a newly proposed fee for plastic bag use, for instance, are creating controversy and questioning whether our environmental future will look like. So joining us here today are two colleagues and friends of mine. We first have New York State Assembly member Latrice Walker. Hello. Who represents the 55th Assembly District in Brownsville and who chairs the Assembly's Renewable Energy Subcommittee, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. And Eddie Bautista, who is the Executive Director of the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance and a longtime environmental justice activist. Great to have you here on the show, Eddie. And I think I should disclose that with my other hat at the Brooklyn Movement Center, we are a member of NEJA, so I can't claim to be completely objective here. But I want to jump into the conversation real quick, and sure. I want to start with you, Eddie. We frame this as a conversation around environmental justice, but I know that's a term we use quite loosely. What exactly do you think environmental justice means, particularly in New York City terms?
Sure. So environmental justice is essentially the struggle of low-income communities and communities of color against environmental disparities or burdens, as well as a struggle for equal environmental amenities, right? Mm-hmm. And that takes that covers a range of activities and investments and activities, right? But the other thing that's key about environmental justice, it's not just fighting against burdens or for amenities that's more equal for our communities. It's also that struggle has to be led and defined by those communities, right? Mm. So if your community is fighting against disproportionate burdens or for equal access to amenities, and it's not being led by the people of color, low-income people in that community, then, as Elizabeth Yaup here from Upwards would say, you maybe do missionary work, but that's not environmental justice work. Right. It's at bottom an empowerment movement.
Got you. Okay, so Assemblyman Walker, how do you take that and run with it? That is, you occupy a very, I think, somewhat unique position in the sense that you are the chair of the subcommittee on renewable energy, and you represent Brownsville. So what would you say, given what Eddie just laid out as environmental justice, what would you say are the environmental justice priorities, not just for Brownsville, but for Black and brown and low-income New Yorkers?
Well, thank you. I came to this position very suitably equipped to be able to handle it. I was a student at Pace Law School, where we know there's a Pace Law Climate Center. Mm-hmm. I also went to school in Brazil to discuss and learn about environmental justice issues that were happening internationally. Here in Brooklyn, we are facing a crisis. By the year 2017, we're going to be expecting a brownout. And in order to deal with that, Con Edison went to the PSC and to the governor's office requesting $1 billion by which to restore and rebuild a substation, which we understand is compromised. Instead of allowing that to happen, the state allowed them to spend $250 million by which to explore options for renewable energy, which involves wind and solar, fuel cells. And I look at it as a great economic stimulus for a underemployed and unemployed community. Green jobs will be the new economy of our day. Right. And it allows for people who wouldn't normally have skills to be trained in how to install and maintain solar panels. It provides new opportunities for solar panels on NYCHA developments. We know that their energy cost takes up a large part of their budget. It provides an opportunity for homeowners to be able to put solar panels on their homes as well. So we look at it as a win-win for all, for both employment, for saving money, for building and rebuilding an infrastructure, and really just changing our lifestyle to be more energy conscious, move to more LED lighting systems, be more conscious of how we are utilizing our air conditioners in the summertime. One of the most important aspects of it is that during the summer months when the peak demand is very high, Con Edison has to turn down the power in communities such as mine in Brownsville, Ocean Hill, East New York, and Crown Heights. And one of the most devastating effects of that was when they had to turn it down, and it compromised the elevators and chilling in Brookdale Hospital. So we just look for it as a way of renewal, not just of sustainability for our state, but also really on our systems in place right now in low-income communities.
And how do you think these issues that you're talking about are resonating with people, right? I mean, environmental justice, again, is not a term that we necessarily use often in Black and brown communities. Do people feel as though, are these things that, the things that you just discussed, do you think that people are holding them, that this is sort of threatening their direct personal interest, or do they see it as sort of a far off, more kind of, you know, amorphous threat for them?
Well, right now, these things are sort of in vogue. So we are coming of age, if you will, and really about how we are looking at ourselves as it relates to the climate and our sustainability in this world. So I think that people are very excited. Everyone wants to put solar panels on their home, particularly because it's going to help them save money in their energy costs. And everyone is just really, you know, they're willing to learn about, you know, how they can play an important role in this. And we're exploring those opportunities. And I'm sure everyone is excited, or as excited as I am about it. Good.
Well, let's step back and look at, on a citywide level, Eddie, because you've been doing this work for quite a long time. And we know that the mayor recently issued his One NYC plan that lays out goals and strategies for resilience and sustainability in the face of climate change. And I know that NYCHA actually had a response to that. How would you depict the strength of the plan that the mayor put out, and what was your response to it?
Absolutely. So we were really thrilled when the mayor announced his basically rebranded city sustainability plan. He rebranded it One NYC, and what he did for the first time for any sustainability plan for the city, I think one of the first times in the country, he put equity, environmental justice, essentially at its heart. That's the core of the plan.
And Bloomberg had not.
Well, he had done it tangentially. Like, there were a number of initiatives that clearly spoke to the disparities of people of color experience, but de Blasio did it throughout the initiatives and included some economic justice components to it that weren't in the Bloomberg plans, right? And so what we did was we looked at the report. We gave the administration like about a year because we wanted to give them a lot of time to roll out the initiatives. And if you go to our website, nyc-eja.org, you'll see our analysis, which is called the New York City Climate Justice Agenda, strengthening the mayor's plan. And, you know, what we found was, I think, a fair take, which was there was some good stuff in it, there was some shortcomings, and we came up with literally dozens of recommendations to strengthen the plan.
And what do you think that Black and brown communities can do to organize to strengthen the plan?
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that your organization and the Assemblywoman's is dealing with is specifically the energy component and the potential heat exposures that communities like Central Brooklyn may experience. You know, people know now about the storm surges because of Sandy, but what people don't realize, for example, is that heat kills more people every year than storm surges, right? And when we start looking at what the average New York City summer day is going to look like by the 2050s, the temperature is going to increase 4 to 6 degrees. The number of 90-degree days are expected to double. The number of heat waves are expected to triple or quadruple. Right? And if you look at Central Brooklyn and the dozen neighborhoods affected by the Con Ed plan, these are also the communities at the highest heat vulnerability index. So what you have essentially are the communities that are the most vulnerable to heat impacts also be at greatest risk for energy shortages and blackouts and brownouts. Right. So if you think that, and it affects all aspects of our lives, if you think that community-police relations are tense now, imagine how much worse it's going to be with those kind of summer heat impacts that I mentioned.
Well, I mean, and you've projected pretty far forward, and this is for both of you, but we've got some climate issues like right on us, right? We know El Nino is here, and so people could be experiencing these things over the next few months to a year. I mean, what do you see as being the current threat? I mean,
the Brooklyn Queens Demand Management, the Con Ed program that the Assemblywoman's talking about, they're projecting shortfalls right now. Like, this is not in the far-flung future. Last year, there was a partial brownout in Brownsville houses, right? Just a week or two ago, there was a block in Flatbush that lost power. Right. This is upon us now, and we're worried about this summer, right? Con Ed is already behind schedule. They have to shave off the total, something like 52 megawatts. Yes. That's the size of a power plant, right? And they're already behind schedule. And again, we're not accusing them of negligence or bad faith or anything like that, but there is a sense of urgency to this problem and it's part of the recommendations we had and critique of the mayor's plan, is that even with those heat impacts I'm talking about, there is no city extreme heat initiative yet as part of the mayor's planning process. Wow. There's an urgency that's missing that we think people need to really step up their games.
Well, one of the things I also want to include is we understand, particularly in NYCHA buildings and communities of color, like we have high instances of asthma, particularly among not just children, but also adults. And if you go and you look at any of the NYCHA buildings where they have sort of ventilations, you see that they are covered by dust mites. They haven't been cleaned or maintained in a very long time. So as a part of the mayor's plan, 11 developments, I'm proud to say, within the 55th Assembly District will have a sort of overhaul of its ventilation systems as a portion of this renewable, sustainable initiative that the city has undertaken. So I'm excited, not just on the energy components, but really just what this effect will have just on the lifestyle, also the healthcare systems within our neighborhood, particularly because we're expecting also to have an investment of $700 million from the governor to overhaul our healthcare system, and looking forward to a new hospital at Brookdale, and really what that means just holistically for the neighborhood. So the climate, we can look at it from a global perspective, but really just a local perspective as well, and which I'm really excited about.
And on that local perspective, I know that we're talking about some really big issues here, but I want to just focus our attention really quickly on the fact that in the City Council, as you know, there was this bill that was introduced to attach a fee to the use of single-use plastic bags. And when you go shopping, pick up your groceries using a plastic bag, you have to pay an extra, what is it, 5 cents. How do you feel about that? Because I know that my organization and Eddie, we have been in support of it, but I'm curious to know where do you stand on that issue?
Well, when the issue came up, particularly the seniors in my community were horrified by it based on the fact that it's going to be an additional cost to people who are on fixed incomes. So I think that while it's a system that we need to address, putting the burden on our most vulnerable economically communities, I think is just wrong. Perhaps the supermarket owners or whoever the producers are of these plastic bags should take some accountability for what they're doing to our environment and really bear the brunt of the cost as opposed to shifting them to communities of color.
Sure. And Eddie, I know you must have a response to that. I mean,
well, I mean, I totally get it, and people naturally feel, especially when they're already overburdened on a variety of levels, that it's like one more thing, right? But for example, the way the legislation was crafted, it was crafted to precisely not have the burden fall on people who are, under a certain income some level, people want public benefits, public assistance. So there are exemptions for folks on that end of the spectrum. And I think what people always forget is that the thing about solid waste is that it doesn't just disappear. Like, people see it goes to the curb and that's it, but it ends up in transfer stations that are clustered in low-income communities of color, right? The South Bronx and North Brooklyn, Bushwick, and these are tons. I mean, again, people just see the plastic bag and they think, but cumulatively, we're talking about hundreds of tons, right? And each ton of these things get carried by transfer station trucks back and forth, spewing diesel, and then that's just getting them collected and out of the city. Then they end up in landfills that are predominantly in African-American low-income communities across the eastern seaboard. So that's part of the problem, is that if we're going to grapple with climate change, it's going to mean some inconveniences. It's going to mean certain sacrifices. Now, the key, as some people mentioned, is to make sure it doesn't, the burden doesn't disproportionately fall on low-income people. I think the legislation attempts to address that.
Right, and I'm sorry for giving Eddie the last word on that.
That's okay. Well, and
the Assemblywoman woman always has the last word because she's in the legislature.
To their defense, and they would say, well, we reuse the bags. If they'll use them as garbage bags, and of course they'll use them as they're transporting all of their sort of day-to-day belongings all across the city. But I do recognize that the burden that these plastic bags put on our environment, and we do need to look at alternative means by which to, handle this situation.
Well, thank you for being gracious about that. I mean, maybe we'll explore this on another show, but we're going to have to wrap up there. So thank you for both for coming.